Welcome to the Reinvention Show with your host, Carol Wain. Today, Carol's guests are Marc Levine and Dr. Stephen Hobbs. I'm your producer, Keith Vachon, and now your host, Carol Wain.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Reinvention Show. Today's topic is Leadership Reinvention, which is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Many people who watch this show don't really realize what my background is, and in 1996 I created my first business, and I won Entrepreneur of the Year in 2004. Geez, that was 10 years ago, as an incentive company owner. And what an incentive company is a company that creates employee engagement and customer engagement and sales incentive programs to help corporations achieve their objectives. So today's topic is all about leadership and how we are going to profit by using the relationships that we have with our people well. So let's get started with my first guest, who is Marc Levine. Now, Marc was on our show as a hot seat guest a couple of weeks ago, and now he's back as one of our one of our experts. So welcome, Marc.
Good morning, Carol. Thank you for having me back. I hope next time to come back as a producer or a voiceover person.
Awesome.
I'm going to play every role on the show.
One day you can come back as host, too.
I will come back as host, yes. Thank you.
So Marc guides people into their peak performance zone by focusing on their internal and external communication. He works as a consulting manager for Retenza, the leader in employee engagement and retention. So, Marc, what do you mean by focusing on internal and external communication as it relates to peak performance?
Well, that's easy for you to say, Carol. Well, our world is created by what we say to ourselves and what we say to others. So by focusing on those areas, I get to help people with just about everything they do. And it started out, my career has been in two areas. It's been in sales and sales management, and it's been in people development as an executive coach, as a communications trainer, and facilitating team alignment. Initially, most of my work was focused on external communication. As a sales rep, what am I going to say to the customer or the prospect that's going to pull them in, engage them in such a way that they want to continue the conversation and potentially make a commitment to purchase my product or service. When I started working with people, I was working a lot with first training sales reps in the same area, and then training managers to have conversations with their employees, to have performance management conversations, to have feedback conversations. As we started to do the work, and I noticed this in myself, that what I would say and what I felt comfortable saying to someone else was dependent on the belief that I had inside of me. So if I felt that my service, if I'm selling consulting services, coaching services, and I feel that they are worth $10,000 a month, if I have that belief that there's so much value, then when it comes time for asking for money, I'm going to be very competent and feel very congruent in what I'm asking for. If I'm wondering whether the prospect can afford it or whether it's really worth that, am I really worth that much money, or my company worth that much money, then no matter how much I try to finesse the words that are going to come out, they're going to be on this shaky foundation. So that's when I started paying more attention to what was happening internally. And if you think about building a house, the house is the external communication. It's what the world sees. They see your windows, they see your doors, your shutters, your, everything else. But it's the foundation.
Oh, Marc is frozen. Marc, you froze there for a second. So you're talking about the foundation?
Yes, I just said the most brilliant thing I've ever said in my life, and I don't even know how I'm going to repeat it because it was so in the moment. What I said is that people see the outside of the house, and that's what they say looks good or doesn't look good. But if the house is on a shaky foundation, the house is not going to stay up. So if the house is your external communication, how people see you represented in the world, the foundation is your internal communication, what the beliefs that you hold, how you're talking to yourself about your world, and that's what makes all the difference. If you don't believe in yourself as a salesperson or your product or your service, or you don't believe in yourself as an employee, you're not going to be able to have the conversations you want to have.
It's quite interesting you talked about the shaky foundation. Where is it that you live?
I live in sunny Southern California, and our world has been rocked a little bit over the past couple of weeks. We've had 2 earthquakes. And it's funny, you know, you watch people during an earthquake, and I was lucky in each earthquake. I've been out here for 6 years, and each one I was with people who I actually love. Mm. And my experience during the first time was with my girlfriend. It was 6:30 a.m. And when the earthquake happened, you know, I just grabbed her in my arms and said, "I'll protect you." And I have to tell you, that was probably the best earthquake I've ever experienced. Because whatever happened, there was love flowing through me. And whatever happened next, our foundation was love. It wasn't fear. So whatever happened, even if things started falling around me, the foundation was love, and then any action I took was going to come from that. The second time I was with a dear group of friends, and we were having a wonderful conversation. We were so engaged in our conversation, so present in the moment, that it took a while for us to notice that the house was slowly rolling back and forth.
Wow.
So our foundation was strong, our internal foundation was strong in each of those cases, and what was happening around us didn't faze us much.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, that was a really good segue. I'm kind of proud of myself for that one.
That was a great segue.
So let's talk about the connection between employee engagement and retention and peak performance. First of all, how do you define employee engagement? Because there are very differing views about what employee engagement is. And how is it different than employee satisfaction? And then I'd like you to explain how all 3 work together.
How about
in 12 seconds or less. I'm kidding.
What if I suggest this, that I can be as engaged in this question as possible? What if we take one question at a time and you guide me into the next question?
Sure. All right. So how do you define employee engagement?
Well, how do we define engagement? You're a skier, correct?
Yes, I am.
Have you ever been engaged when you're skiing?
All the time.
All the time. And what does it feel like when you're engaged skiing? As a skier, when you're engaged in the activity of skiing, what does it feel like?
Sometimes it's scary, but usually it's fun.
And are you, when you're truly engaged, and when you're truly engaged in something, when a child's engaged in an activity, they are present in that activity. When we are truly engaged in a conversation, we're in this moment. We're not thinking about where it's, we might be thinking about that it's going to go somewhere, but we're just here now. And that's how I define engagement, being so wrapped up in an activity, being present in that moment with whatever you're doing and whoever you're doing it with. That's engagement. So then let's take that into the corporate world. When an employee is engaged in their work, they are wrapped up in their work. They're present in the moment. They're excited about it, but they're probably not talking about their excitement because they're so busy doing what they need to do. And they're also accessing a state of flow, a state of creativity, where they have more access to resources than they normally have. That's the power of employee engagement, because they're in it. They're excited, they're passionate, they want to do more, they're involved in their activity, it's capturing all of them. Engagement is the idea that something is capturing all of you. Very different from satisfaction. Have you ever had sex where you were satisfied, and have you ever had sex where you were engaged?
That's a really personal question, of course.
It's a rhetorical question, but it's, you know, sometimes when we try, if we take it outside of the workplace to something we know so well, it's very easy to know that, yeah, that sex, that food was satisfying. Or you're so engaged in the food, you're basking in the taste. When I've been engaged in food, sometimes even before it gets to my mouth, I'm just in such deep appreciation of it and enjoying it so much. I'm seeing it on the fork. I'm just captured by it. Versus, yeah, that burger was pretty good. That's how I would define satisfaction. Yeah, I'm pretty good. My manager leaves me alone. You know how most people define satisfaction at work? Their manager leaves them alone.
That's sad. Yeah.
It is, isn't it? What a low, God, the bar is so low. The bar is so low for what satisfaction is. I'm left alone to do my job. Sad.
Mm-hmm. So how are we going to tie engagement, retention, and peak performance together?
Well, I'm going to just go slightly to the left and say, how do we tie engagement, retention, and leadership? Because our topic is about reinventing leadership. Mm-hmm. And as a leader, you have the opportunity to start to engage your employees by having, first of all, different internal conversations about the importance of engagement. So it starts there, that it is important to have engaged employees, not just satisfied employees, not just people getting the job done, but I truly believe that when my employees are engaged and they're in that flow, that they're doing their best work. When they're passionate about what they're doing their best work. I remember I worked with a client in Long Island. It was back in the early 90s, and it was a company that was involved in the space program in the 60s. And they were building components for space travel to go to the moon. You know, Kennedy said, we're going to the moon. And that engaged a nation. And all the people there, I talked to some of the people there who had been there a long time, and they just felt, they remember that time when they knew where they were going. They were excited by the vision. They felt they were doing something important. They were engaged. Whether they were sweeping up or they were doing accounting work, they were engaged. And those are the employees who produce the best. So if a manager realizes, even if they don't care about their employees, but I want to get my best work, I want to find a way to engage my employees, and that's a different belief system. And then if they start creating an environment and having different conversations, then you make it easier for people to get engaged, you get peak performance, and you do different things as a leader.
I think it's really important that a lot of the mistakes that I see in leadership are they do not share the vision with their employees. So how are the employees going to be engaged when they don't know what they're engaged with? So good.
Exactly.
Good point.
And then you know what they become engaged with? They become engaged with getting a project done, so it relieves their stress. Mm-hmm. They get focused on trying to get something done and hit a deadline, so they don't get the crap beaten out of them. And their focus is on relieving stress instead of the excitement of when we have a vision. You know, when you talk to people about your vision for the Reinvention Show, and we want to be on the show with you because it's exciting and it taps into something with us, you get the best out of us. Mm-hmm. The power of sharing a vision with people. And I saw a study by one of the leading research companies in employee engagement that only 40% of workers know what their company's vision is, the strategy, and the tactics.
Yeah.
There's such an opportunity.
So how do you know what to do?
How do they know what to do? They only know what they're told to do by a manager who's probably stressed out. When a manager, and see, that's the cool thing with leaders, anyone can be a leader. Any person can be a leader, and if you're managing, any number of people, whatever's happening above you, you can decide, I want to have an engaged team. I'm going to let them know where I'm going. I want to get their input. I want to have them involved in this. I want to create a new experience. So you could reinvent yourself as a leader, even if your fiefdom is 5 people.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can also lead if you don't have a title of a manager. So
yeah.
That's a whole different conversation about organizational behavior. So,
absolutely.
So what is the biggest mistake that you see that employers are making as leaders, and what does it take to switch things around?
You know what it takes? It takes the willingness to do something differently. It takes me as a leader, as a manager of people, to say, I'm going to do it differently in a moment. I'm going to do it differently when I'm stressed. I'm going to try something new. I'm going to be vulnerable. You cannot reinvent leadership without your willingness to be vulnerable and make a mistake and not know how to do something. And when you realize as a leader that being vulnerable is actually a strength, that your employees will connect to you because they see that you're human, and they think, oh, I can be human too. I mean, I worked with a SVP in a bank, and his employees were not engaged. In fact, they felt the opposite about him, and we did a team alignment event. And I said, share something I want you to be vulnerable. You're going to kick off this event by being vulnerable, by sharing something about you that will allow your people to know who you are as a person. And I didn't know what he was going to share, and he said, okay, I'll do it. He ended up talking about his childhood and his family dynamics that made him into the controlling person that he was. And when his people heard that, they connected to him, and they jumped on his side. And then everything he said afterwards was different. He was vulnerable. So when you're willing as a leader to do something differently, then change can happen. The biggest mistakes companies make is start to talk about we're going to change something before they actually make the changes. Because most people, if they worked anywhere, they know about the fad of the month, and they've heard the rhetoric before. Mm-hmm. So I suggest don't say anything about changing. Just start to make changes. Let people see your behaviors, and then after you're starting to have some impact, then talk about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Start with the behaviors first and let the rhetoric come afterwards. Be willing to be vulnerable to see what would happen. Or let people know that we're going to experiment. Start small. Start with a couple things that you think you can impact. Don't make it a big initiative. People hear initiatives and they immediately get turned off.
Right.
That's what I think.
I had a gazillion statistics for this show, but I've forgotten the one about the trust. But trust of senior leadership is so important to employee engagement, and sadly, it's so lacking. Yeah. So powerfully vulnerable is definitely a way to go. I mean, I did it with my own staff, and I had to find the balance between being vulnerable and being a basket case. So there is a fine line there.
That's so great. And you just illustrated though that when you start to do something new, that you may go overboard. When I start to help managers have feedback conversations, sometimes they dump 6 months worth of feedback in because they finally realize they're going to get feedback. And, and that's okay. That's okay. Your willingness to make mistakes and then to own up to them, you will actually engage your people. You will touch something in their hearts. You will touch something as human beings that will get them on your side, that will have them connect to you. Because we connect more through our heart than our head. And when you do that as a human being working with other human beings, even in the most stressful place, people relax. They feel this relief. They just naturally connect to you. It's a really amazing thing how it happens.
Well, now I've got one last question for you, Marc. What does the ideal peak performance workplace look like in your mind?
It's about people. It's all about people. It's all about people who are caring about other people, and caring about their goals, and caring about what they want, and caring about their fears, and connecting in that way. It's connecting through your heart to do the work. It's that feeling of support, and the feeling that you can go and you can make a mistake and you can take a risk and that you're fully supported. It's about people wanting you to win. I think that's the ideal environment. And then if you add in all the fun perks, the food and the laundry and all the other things and the flexible hours, but if you can't give someone flexible hours, but you let them know that you care about their situation and you want to try to help them and you support them, that'll go a lot more than having flexible hours and still not feeling supported.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the people.
And I think, well, actually, I know that one of the biggest leadership challenges and why employee disengagement is so prevalent is because the leadership, the people in leadership are not understanding what's going on with their employees. We had a joke before we started this show how many references we would have to reality TV. I'm going to bring one up right now, and it's Undercover Boss. If you've ever seen that show, you see that every single episode there is someone in a senior leadership role who has no idea what is going on in the trenches. They don't know what their employees are going through.
Right.
Personally, they don't realize that the decisions that they've made at the corporate level
Right.
are negatively impacting their employees who really want to do a good job for the most part. Yeah. So,
I love that, and I watch the show from time to time, and there's a certain setup to the show to make good TV. The boss needs to find the worker who's young or older and struggling to make their mortgage payments and cares about and loves their family dearly. And then the boss connects with them and finds out what it's really like and what happens to that employee when they write them up for being late. Because all of a sudden it's not about procedures, it's about a human being. And then we have the moment at the end where the boss brings the employee in the office and reveals, I'm the boss of the company, and I care about you, and I'm going to support you. And those moments are all staged, but I think they touch people so dearly. I know I always have like a tear in my eye, because I want to work with people like that who care that much about me and support. Of course we want to, they always give them like money for education, or they give them a car or a trip, and of course we want that, but what we want more is we want to know people are on our side. We want to know, we walk around, a lot of us, people walk around in the world feeling lonely and not sure who supports us, and when we feel supported, we give more, we care about that person, and then when we feel supported at work, we give more, and that's the power of employee engagement. And that's why engaged employees don't want to leave.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you, Marc. We'll be back to you when we come to our expert discussion in a little bit. So let's move on to Dr. Stephen Hobbs, who is our resident expert for the show on the topic of leadership reinvention. And Stephen Hobbs is known as Dr. Wealth, with Dr. W-E-L-L-T-H. He guides industry trailblazers to co-create iconic work-client experiences of such quality and momentum that quicker, better, affordable, safer are words that evoke saying yes for even more experiences. And my apologies for screwing that up, Steve. So welcome to the show, and Keith, if we can have Steve on camera, that would be awesome.
Hi, Carol.
Hey, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. And yourself?
I'm doing really well.
I know, I can hear it. Can't wait to have listened to Marc as well, so thank you.
Yeah, so tell us about what you do in the world, and then I believe you've got a little presentation for us. So
I do, so thank you, yes. So I create tomorrow's workplaces today. I guess that's the best description. There's this view of an imagined future of a workplace. I think you were talking about it a little bit there with Marc at the end. I call it the well-living workplace, a place of work where you live and work well together. And there's an imagined future around that for every organization, and I help people get there quicker and more affordably and safer. And that's essentially what I do. And it talks about culture, it talks about engagement, it talks about educating approaches like mentoring, which is part of the presentation I'd like to make this morning.
Great. So shall we get started with, do you want to start with the first slide, Steve?
Sure, that'd be great. You'll notice the slide's up and it says 3 Achilles heels, dash, and I'll come back to that dash a little later. 3 transformational advantages of your organization of great work. You decide now. So,
yeah, Keith, if we can have the slide. Sorry to interrupt, Steve. Keith, if we can have the slide up.
So I'll just keep going. So the when you see the slide, you'll notice it says "You decide now," which is at the very end of that statement I just read. What I'd like to do is just inform you is that there's a decision that I believe you need to make today that's going to greatly help you to take a look at how you organize your great work, to create that well-living workplace, to create that place that Marc was just sharing with you about people being engaged and in flow. And there's this perspective that you have to look at from a 3 Achilles heels dash 3 transformational advantages. There's a way in which to look at it, and that's what I'd like to explore a little bit. So if it has a bit more of a feel of a head space rather than the heart space, then you'll understand where it's coming from today. So what I'd like you to do is just reflect and review what I'm going to chat about, and then use it to reinvent what it is that you're doing in your organization. And I'm going to assume is that most of you who are listening have at least a couple of other people working with you. Maybe you may have a large corporation, maybe you have a small business, but what I'm going to share with you also applies if you're a solo entrepreneur as well. So before I get started, I'd just like to ask you to cross your arms across your chest for me, if you could. I always like to make things a little more interactive. And now what I'd like you to do is just cross them the other way. Carol's
can't do that very
a little bit. We get very habitual when we put our arms, fold them the same way, and what we need to do is learn to fold them the other way. In other words, to see things a little bit differently. So there's something about perspective here that I want you to think about as we move through this presentation. And what I'd like to do also is just start with looking at the terms manage and lead, because this is a show about leadership. And to be able to talk about leadership, you have to talk about management at the same time. And what's happening here is that when you manage the systems so that you can move forward with the work, and the people are involved. Whereas when you lead the person from their view of the future and the organization's view of the future, from the system that they might have about how they personally engage. And that's the really great connection about today's presentation. So it's manage systems for people, lead person from system. And that system is their hierarchy of values, which is another important element of this engagement story that we're sort of threading through today. And what that does is that manage and lead, what you have to remember is that you actually leave one to enter another, and as you leave that, you enter the other one. And you'll notice this infinity sign that's on the page, and on the slide, sorry. And it just means that you're going back and forth, and that can go from week to week, day to day. Heck, it can go from minute to minute, right? It's always there, and you're having to deal with it. So this notion of perspective that I'm sharing with you, I want to use that glass concept that we always talk about, and that glass of water, or the glass of content. And with that is that you know that you hear the story, is the glass half empty or is it half full? Half empty sort of suggests that things are not going well. Half full means things are going well. But I'd like to offer something from a perspective. And this is where I'm going to ask you to fold your arms the other way. And I'm going to share with you is that glass is neither half full nor half empty. It is actually full. And the reason that it's full is because there's air in it. So the glass is actually full. The content of it is water and air, but that's what's in that glass. I'm just asking you to shift perspectives a little bit here, right? Now, if I said, okay, is the glass half empty or half full with water, you might argue with me and say, well, it's water, it's half full, it's half full, right? But if I talk to you about the glass and its content, then it's water and air. So there's a perspective there that holds something that has half empty, half full, but it's actually full. And so let me take that forward into this notion of your organization of great work. And I'm going to share the following with you, these what are called the 3 Achilles heels. Let's say that's the half empty view of things. Then there's the 3 transformational advantages, which is the half-full point of view. But I'm going to actually suggest that neither the half-empty, half-full is there. It's really about the 2 of those. And let me get to that here in a second. What we have here is 3 elements of organization of great work from a managing and leading point of view. And these 3 things are something that I'm just sharing with you as those 3 that are really important to the organization development of organizations today. And the first one is this thing called organization culture. And for me, organization culture is about human interactions and the artifacts that result from those interactions. So how you package something could be culture-based. What paintings you have on the wall is culture-based. What you say to each other is culture-based, right? And it influences the organization of work. And this is a topic that's gaining a lot of momentum in the social media, blogs, articles out there at this point in time. It's been around for quite a while, but it's really getting traction now. Another one is this area of engagement and recognition. Marc mentioned from Carol's prompting is this notion of engagement satisfaction. But there's the connection of recognition, is that if you're engaged, how do you get recognized, right? How do you get people to their a consistent performance level while saying thanks, right? And involving this concept of resilience as well. I weave that in there. And that's gaining a lot of momentum. There's lots of software that's being created around that, and a lot more articles are being written around that topic as well. Again, it's been around for a while. We can go back to motivation, inspiration, all of those areas as well in support of that. But there is a third area that is now just really starting to get going. We've heard a lot about coaching, but there's this area of mentoring and facilitating. And it's really the educating approach that supports this learning that's taking place in the workplace today. And these 3 things, all right, can be your 3 Achilles heels. In other words, could be this notion of where you might fall down. You're half empty if you're not doing it correctly. Or they could be your 3 transformational advantages, half full, if you really make them work for you and you bring them to the foreground and help each other to move through them. So I want you to hold that perspective, but as you know, there's actually a third perspective here. But let me just, before we get to that, let me just talk a little bit about this half empty from an organization point of view. All right? This half empty really is about problems, or you're voicing concerns. It's what you're paying attention to right now, and it has this sort of past to present perspective. And to use the Marc's word about flow, it actually hinders your workflow. So this notion of half empty, problems, concerns, it's what hinders your work flowing forward. And it has the sense of, yes, there's feedback, and there's also just a little bit of what I call feed forward that's happening. But let me give you the other view of that in terms of the transformational advantages. What about this half-full perspective? Things are viewed as appreciations. You voice joy around what's happening, all right? You're actually working from your intentions, that future perspective. You're bringing that future to the present, not the past to the present. You're bringing the future to the present. And what it does is it helps your workflow. It's those things that really help your workflow. And what it's doing is it's actually providing what I call feed forward and feed fromward. In other words, you're moving a person forward with what they're learning, but also you're giving them feed fromward from the future about what they're doing. So a lot of the points that Marc was making falls into this really nicely. And then what happens is that there is this notion of the glass is half full, half empty, yet it is full. In other words, the 2 of those actually work with one another. That's interesting. Concern works with joy. Problems works with appreciation. Yes, they do. Every day we find ourselves in those kind of situations. Those things are interacting with one another to the extent that problems and appreciations is what you deal with every day. So to hold one over the other is actually a mismatch. This notion of creative tension that you're involved in actually goes back and forth and back and forth. And there's just a couple of other examples here for you when you think about it. What you pay attention to in the intention. So if I see it, I believe it, attention. If I believe it, I'll see it, is intention. We hold those, but they interact with one another. We hold this notion of concern and joy. We hold hinder and help, problems and appreciations, weaknesses and strengths. What the story really is about here is how do these things weave together? And here's the really important part of it. How do you weave those together so that you lean into the appreciative side so that that actually becomes more where you come from, so that when a problem comes to the foreground, you deal with the problem from an appreciation perspective, not a problem perspective. That's what I'm really attempting to get at here, is this whole notion as, do you want to look at it from an Achilles heel, or do you want to look at it as a transformational advantage? Well, you got to look at them both, but you want to lean into the transformational advantage to deal with the Achilles heel. That's really what I'm attempting to get at. So with the managing and leading, the bottom line of the story here that I'm sharing with you is that as problems arise, yes, you have to manage them, but find a way in which to lead each person to deal with those problems. Because they are going to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And someday, Carol, what might actually be really great is I'll come back and I'll show you how to do the wiggly T dance of managing and leading, and we'll have everyone in the audience doing it and then sending in a video of them doing it. How does that sound?
That sounds very engaging. Kind of scary.
So, just summing up, one of the best ways to know where you sit in this back and forth of managing and leading and embracing this whole perspective is to really listen to the words you're sharing. If your words have problem associated with all the time, guess what you're going to get? If your conversation's only about appreciations, yes, you'll get those, but you'll also have the problems as well. It's when you hold both of those and you wiggle them back and forth, that's when you're able to manage and lead, so that the engagement that Marc was talking about to create the well-living workplace is what will actually happen for you. So that's what I wanted to share with you today, Carol.
That's awesome. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and what we'll do, while you were giving your presentation, the slides didn't come up, but we can edit. With the magic of editing, we can get them up there for the final presentation. So that's cool. Thanks very much. So now I want to bring both of you back in, and we're going to have a little chat about engagement and culture and workplace and leadership and wherever else this goes with our conversations, which the audience can probably tell that Marc and Steve and I are friends, and things can just go anywhere. So we'll see what happens. It might be a wiggledy-piggledy dance. So here is one of the statistics that I pulled, and it's 70% of workers are not engaged at work. 50% are present, they show up, and they do the minimum that they need to do so they don't get fired or in trouble. And 20% are actively disengaged. They're actively trying to screw the business up. So isn't that just crazy? These disengaged workers are costing the U.S. businesses, I don't have statistics for the rest of the world, but for the U.S. businesses, over $450 million a year. Can you imagine what could be done with that money if we didn't have disengaged employees?
And that number sounds actually pretty low, considering that sounds actually pretty low.
Yeah, I didn't put my source down for that one. Probably Gallup or...
Yeah, I think it was the Gallup poll.
Yes.
Yeah, so we've already talked about this a little bit. Let's have some more thoughts on what you would tell business leaders so that we can get this disengaged number down and the engaged number up. What would you guys say? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll just share something I've been thinking about for quite a while. It's this notion of, you hear this term, 110%. we're going to get performance up to 110%. And I'm going, what? What does that mean, right? It's an illusion, right? If you say, okay, a person has their job profile and they're going to meet their accountabilities and responsibilities, and let's say that's 100%, okay? The best that someone's going to do is not hit 100% all the time, because there's things that get in the way over the course of the day. Emails come in, phone calls come in, maybe something happened at home, maybe the power went off and they couldn't get into their computer. Any number of things can happen. So this notion of performance at 100% is a little bit of a misnomer. So if we think about people, okay, if people are giving, let's say, 40 to 60%, right, at this point in time, and you say, okay, we've got disengagement of the figures that you just mentioned, Carol, what would happen if we could get people who are working another 10% at what it is that they do, right? What would happen for them? Actually tap into that discretionary effort that they have, what they that's there for them to work with. And let's get away from this 110%. It's a great motivational phrase, okay, let's rally it up at 110, but it's not what actually happens. Because from a truth, trust, and transparency point of view, this is where I'm going, from a truth, trust, and transparency point of view, let's call it what it really is and not sugarcoat it or do something that gets those motivational quotes in the way of what's going on. Because really, people want the truth, they want to trust each other, and they want to be transparent. And let's call it really what it is, and let's get on with it. So that's coming very much from a head speak point of view. I appreciate that.
Cool.
Hi, Carol.
Yeah, go ahead, Marc.
I love what Steve said, and it comes back to something that I echoed earlier, where an organization will get excited about a big initiative, and they'll want to go big, and everyone's going to get involved, and we're going to make slogans and hats and rewrite our values. And the idea of starting small, I mean, 10%. And I love what you said, Steve, about that discretionary engagement. A part of people who they want to be more engaged, they're going to be engaged in something. Let's see if you can get them engaged in what you as a leader care about. So I love that idea, that discretionary engagement. I love that idea of let's just start small. And what I would also add to this is, as a leader, at whatever level you are, this goes back to what Steve was saying, what are your people paying attention to? Are they talking more about problems, or are they talking more about what's working? Notice what your people are engaged in. And notice if they're engaged in the things that you as the leader think are most important to be engaged in based on what you're told to do. So if you're a leader and you believe in people being able to make mistakes, notice if your people are actually engaged in the opportunity to risk versus engaged in, I want to make sure this is perfect before I hand it in. Notice if your people are having a dialogue in a meeting where they're jumping all over each other because they feel free to share, or they're waiting politely until someone has finished. Notice what your people are engaged in and check if they're engaged. You can do it as a percentage. What percentage of the time are they engaged in the things that I think are most important?
Yeah, and I want to add to that. I can be very heart-centered leader, and I can also be, my husband called me Miss Trump at one point because I believe in hiring very slow and firing fast. So to me, it's if you know that 20% of your employees are actively disengaged, you either need to get them into the engaged part of it, move them up to even the 50% that's just there, or get rid of them. You're doing no favor to the employee or to your business to keep actively disengaged employees in your organization. So that's the tough side of me. The other side of me is, let's see how we can increase just a little bit, just like Marc said, just a little bit. What is it? Most people want to be appreciated, and they're just not getting any appreciation whatsoever from their employers. I worked in an organization where the supervisor was so two-faced that it drove us crazy. Why isn't that being caught, that kind of behavior being caught, so that the supervisor is being coached or mentored into recognizing and appreciating the employees instead of just sucking up to the boss? So that's my 2 cents worth.
And Carol, when you talk about appreciation, I also think of understanding where the employee is coming from. People are willing to work late. They're even willing to sacrifice their home lives. It's when they don't think that you care that they're sacrificing their home lives and you don't understand that this may be causing some tension at home, that's when they start to get resentful. It's not that most people don't want to work harder. They just want to feel that you appreciate what they're doing, you understand the sacrifices they're making. And when you acknowledge those things, and that's such a small thing as we think of it, as consultants and people who help others do this, but when you can get people to slow down and put down their phone and just take a moment to, to recognize that someone is giving more and that it's taken from something else. Wow. You touch something in them and they want to give more, even if they didn't think they had more to give.
Absolutely.
Words are so important. Words matter. I think they actually really matter. And there's not necessarily absolute words that you can use, because you go in an organization, I've done this many, many times, and you have people describe the organization, you're wondering if they're talking about the same place. Mm-hmm. But they start to do it. So with this words that really matter aspect, I'll go back to a little bit, I shared it fairly quickly. It's this notion of feedback, feed forward, and feed fromward. Now, we all know about the feedback. I talk about that as being what you learn about the person from the past, bringing it into the future, right? Something has happened and you're giving them feedback. But there's also the feed forward, which is to have that conversation, to engage that person about how it is that they can learn what they're doing now that actually moves them forward. Not to loop back and come back and commiserate and do all those but actually move forward and go, oh, okay, that's kind of neat, haven't thought about that. Mm-hmm. But there's also this feed fromward, and this fromward word I know is kind of new, but it's really working from the future is really tying what it is that they're doing into that future. Keep linking that story to that vision, that mission, those values that we just put up on the wall and say, great, thanks. Mm. Oh, they actually mean something to people. Right, to Marc's point about that engagement, the words that are important. So, I remember feedback, feed forward, and feed fromward, and I would do a lot more feed fromward than feedback, but certainly learn to feed forward.
Absolutely.
I love what you. Go ahead, please, Carol.
So no, it just ties in with my next question, which is interestingly starting with the word feedback is one of the drivers of employee engagement. And then statistics from a variety of sources indicate that 98% of employees who do not get feedback are disengaged. On the flip side, 43% of highly engaged employees receive feedback at least once a week. So what you're saying, Steve, is not just feedback, but feed forward and from forward? Was that your other term that you used?
Feed fromward.
Fromward.
Yep.
Fromward. So I think this is all tying into people need to feel appreciated. People need to know what they're doing right, what they're doing that could be different. That's where the mentoring comes in, the coaching. What else would you say this communication is valuable for?
Well, two things. Two things that really help this out, all right? And it's this notion of saying, gosh, thanks. Wow, just to say thanks, right? Mm-hmm. But to say thanks with the genuineness, the authenticity of the thanks. Not, thanks for that. No. Hey, thanks. Appreciate what you did. Right? There's those words just simply shared, and the person knows that it comes from truth and trust. That's awesome. But you know what? One of the things that we forget to do in this notion of engagement and recognition, which I find is just fascinating because I'm currently writing a book on engagement and recognition, is we don't ask people how they would like to be recognized.
Absolutely.
We assume that we know how to recognize the person, right? And we make things up, and then we wonder why we get these sideway glances. We get people walking away scratching their head going, what was that conversation about?
That's so brilliant, Steve. And most people will recognize other people in the way they want to be recognized. So if I'm not a person who cares, who needs to hear encouraging words from another, then my belief is people don't need encouraging words to do great work. And then how can I ever appreciate the work of other people in words? Because I have that foundational belief that it's not important. And what you're saying, Steve, reminds me of a book called The 5 Languages of Love. And it's for people in relationship. And it basically says that the way you feel loved may be different from how your partner feels loved. And the true masters in the area of love, or the masters in the area of employee engagement, are the people who, the wizards who go and step out of their comfort zone to help people feel appreciated and encouraged and engaged in their language and what's going to mean something to them, whether that's recognizing them in front of others or recognizing them privately, whether it's writing words or demonstrating something, giving them time off. Those are the true people who take it to a mastery level. And I just love that you brought that up, Steve.
So,
and to that point, Mark, right, is how do you appreciate someone when they've just made a mistake? Right? How do you, that's that weaving part that I'm talking about, is that, okay, the glass just became half empty, quote, quote, right? Yet at the same time, I don't want the person to hold on to this half empty view. I want to use that half full view to bring them with me. That's the, how do I do that? That's mastering that.
Yes.
That is a beautiful part of the workplace if you can get to that part. So.
Yeah. Do you know, does anyone actually take the 5 languages of love and incorporate that into a corporate setting? Has anyone ever done that?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Let's ask the audience to let us know.
Yeah.
I'm sure Steve does it in some form without calling it that, from the way you're talking about mastering engagement. And it's a brilliant idea.
Well, that's what mentoring. If mentoring is really available to you, it's the pull aspect, not the push aspect of mentoring, right? When you do pushing, you're managing. When you're pulling, you're leading. Weave again, all right?
Yeah.
You've got that happening for you, and you learn how to do that. Then there's times when you have to train and instruct, and there's times when you need to mentor and coach. But can you do both of them when you're managing and leading?
Yeah.
There's where you start to master it.
Wow.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's also something, going back to, you asked me the question, internal and external communication, how's it all fit? There's a belief that I start with, and I imagine you both share in your work with people. And my belief is, no matter who I'm working with, as a coach, as a trainer, facilitator, no matter what their behavior has been, how bad it's been, I always know that they have so much more to give the organization than they're giving now. And when you start with that belief as a leader, then that will guide you to try to do things to help pull that out of them, inspire that out of them, so that you create the environment where it's easier for them to give what they have.
And that's holding the two views, doing the wiggly T, and knowing which one you need to use at what point in time, but not throwing one away for the expense of the other. That's the mastery.
It is. You're right, because otherwise it's not real. If we ignore their present behavior and just say, life is great, you're going to be wonderful, that's not real. It doesn't feel authentic. They feel it. And if you just focus on the problem, they feel that too.
Yeah. And that's the other part. Oh, things are going really wrong, right? And then people start to go, you know, people are just following what it is. And I think to another point you made in your earlier presentation, Marc, is I say it this way: people are watching your feet. Whichever way your feet are pointed is where they think you're going. You think about which way your feet are pointed, which way you're looking, which way you're talking. That's the direction you're going to be going in, right? So.
You know, I coached someone recently, and he had challenges, and something near the end of the coaching process as he had started to really make a turnaround. He said, I asked him what worked, because I have my own belief about what worked, and usually as intuitive and in tune as I am, there's always some things that the clients say that surprise me. What he said to me is, you never criticize me. You had multiple opportunities to criticize me when I didn't deliver something that I said I was going to deliver for you, and you never criticized me. And I worked from the belief that he had more to give, and how could I continually find words, even when it was challenging, to support him. And sometimes when I thought he was going to deliver something to me, and the story went in my head, oh, he didn't, and he's doing the old behavior, I had to say to myself, what can I ask him? How can I frame this in a way that finds out where he is? And I would ask questions like, what was your understanding of what we had agreed to? And in that question, there was space for him to talk about it, versus if he felt criticized, he would have got defensive. We never would have got to what he was really feeling and what was going on for him. And often when he explained it, it's like, oh, he had a different understanding than I had. Yeah. I had a different vision. I had not communicated my vision as clearly as I needed to. So of course he didn't know where to go, and his feet were pointed in a different direction.
So, Marc and Steve, do you find that that men are less likely to talk about their feelings and their feelings in the workplace than women are? Or because that's a really interesting story. You kept working with this fellow so that you found out what it was that he was feeling. But if you had pushed, he would have got his back up, and that would have been the end of it. Do you find it more difficult working with men or women?
Steve? No.
Oh, I can go, sure. Okay, to be able to answer that one, Carol, I would share the following. Generally, and again, is that what percentage? 25, 75. I'm just going to share the following. It tends to pattern out the following. Men tend to want to know the answer to the how question, then they'll figure out who you are. What women tend to do, generally, again, whatever statistic is, they'll want to know who you are to figure out how to be with you. Now, I tend to, come a lot more from a who to how, but most people would look at me and think I come how to who, right? But in actual fact, if you step out of that, you say, okay, third perspective, if the why is big enough, the how and who will follow. It's really not about men and women, male and female. It's really, does that why, is that big enough to capture that imagination, all right, that engagement to move the people forward? And then that generalities of how to who to how, that just comes along because that's more about who you are and how you go about doing what you do. It's not about men or women per se. It's just about getting to that bigger why to engage people.
Yeah, back to what you said, Steve, before about the intention leading. You know, getting to that place where you understand, I don't necessarily want to hear people's feelings because I am Dr. Phil. I want to hear what they feel because it ties into their motivation. It helps me understand their beliefs, and it helps unlock their potential and their engagement. Traditionally, women are more in touch with their feelings. That's true. I find, though, that with anyone I work with, when I take a step back and get to know who they are and where they're coming from and their motivation and understand them, then it's so much easier to set free that great behavior and that engagement inside of them.
Cool. Well, you guys, we could talk for hours, but we don't have any more time. We've got 1 minute left. 1 minute. So
we were so engaged in our conversation that time flew, and you facilitated us beautifully. That hour flew by.
Well, thank you, Marc. So I understand, Steve, that you have a gift, because I always ask for stuff from my audience, from my guests, and I understand, Steve, that you've got a gift for the audience
Yes.
Would you like to share what it is?
Most certainly. It's one of my books that I've written called Creating the Well-Living Workplace. And again, the well-living workplace is a place of work where you live and work well together, and how do you create it? It's an insight book based on 30-plus years of consulting, training, educating, mentoring, coaching, everything. I sort of summarized it up in a book with some questions, some techniques of how to actually pull these insights out each day or each week. It's an interactive kind of book, and you'll give them where they can get it from?
Yes, I will. Go to the website, thereinventionshow.com, and you will see a form to fill in to receive the gifts. So just put your name and email in there, and you will get it. So,
Carol, I'm inspired to offer a gift, if I may.
oh, that would be awesome. Thanks, Marc.
Well, based on all the beautiful conversation we have, and again, I'm inspired from our conversation. I would like to offer a free half-hour conversation with any leader, and the conversation will be focused on talking about what percentage of your time your people are engaged in your vision. So we will have a conversation about your vision and taking a look at where your people focus their energy and how closely their energy and their effort and how they speak is aligned to your vision. I will offer a free complimentary half-hour conversation.
Cool. And Marc, do you want them to come through me or go to you directly?
They can go to me directly if they would like. It's Marc, M-A-R-C, at Ritenza.com. Ritenza is listed in my lower third on the Google Hangout. Marc, M-A-R-C, at Ritenza.com.
Awesome. So, to the audience, I can pretty well guarantee you that Marc, Steve, and I will be back in some form, either on this show or live. So keep in touch. Go to the Facebook page. That is facebook.com/Reinvention Show. Put comments below this video on the website, or if you're watching it on our YouTube channel, put your comments there. Let us know what you'd like to hear from us next time. So thank you very much to both you, Marc and Steve. So until next week, and which is all about reinventing your health with Gina and Karen. Until next week, ciao everyone.